5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to the paddock in Abu Dhabi. It's the last of 24 rounds of F1 and the title decider when it comes to the championship. It's McLaren versus Ferrari. 21 points separates them. But there's more than that to talk about. There's plenty more. Lewis Hamilton, it's his last race for Mercedes, and there's big beef in the paddock. You think it was a season closer that would settle out nicely? Not a chance. Andrew Benson, the BBC's F1 correspondent, is to the right of me. A beautiful evening here, nice and warm compared to the last two races, which have been freezing. And I think there is kind of an end-of-season perk about this one, just including everything that's going on. We'll tell you about it in a minute.
Well, the weather's lovely, Jenny. It's nice sitting out here in the evening. Balmy temperatures, unlike Qatar last weekend when it was windy and cold. But the temperatures, the metaphorical temperatures, are much higher than the actual temperatures. Max Verstappen and George Russell appear to have fallen out good and proper. They're having a sort of ongoing war of words, which started in Qatar last weekend, and they've really been laying into each other with the media today.
It's very much handbags at dawn, and bearing in mind this is a night race, it's perfect for it. Scott Mitchell-Marm from the race, you have joined us as well. It's spicy.
It is, yeah. It's good fun. I think the spot you've picked right now is absolutely perfect for where this weekend's at. You know, outside Ferrari, we've got the Ferrari-McLaren Constructors title fight. Lewis Hamilton's coming here in just 4 weeks' time or so. He'll be a Ferrari driver, and we are just safely out of distance from everything that's been pelted around between Red Bull and Mercedes just behind us.
You think this programme is just thrown together? It is not. Meticulous planning has gone into this. So tell me, George and Max, what is going on? Because they haven't had this sort of animosity, this kind of spat for a while.
You know, they fell out a couple of years ago after they crashed in Baku together, but that was quite sort of small-scale stuff. What's happened here is that last weekend in Qatar, Max Verstappen got a one-place grid penalty, which demoted him from pole position to second place, and Russell the other way around. And it was for impeding Russell. And Verstappen feels that Russell's behaviour in the stewards' room was not acceptable. And he came out and made some very critical comments after the race in Qatar, saying that he'd lost respect for Russell. And repeated it basically today and accused Russell of lying in the stewards' room basically. Russell has come out and said that Max can't deal with adversity. When he does, he loses the plot. His team boss, Toto Wolff, has got involved, criticising Christian Horner for criticising Russell.
Oh my goodness.
Describing Horner, not for the first time, as a yapping little terrier who always has to have something to say. And Russell says that Max Verstappen has been enabled because nobody stood up to him.
It is punchy stuff. We will hear from both George Russell and Max Verstappen in just a moment. Max Verstappen actually just walking past us with almost an entourage. It wasn't. It was Sergio Perez and his team members. But there's definitely a divide between these two, isn't there, Scott?
Yeah, there is. As Andrew said, there's been a little bit of needle between them in the past. They've had wheel-to-wheel battles. They have clashed on track. I remember Verstappen being very unhappy with Russell over that move in Baku. But this is an escalation. When you have any kind of personal animosity or bitterness that creeps in, as well as that on-track competition, it moves it into a slightly different sphere, and it's something that we haven't seen probably since we were here in Abu Dhabi the last time it all kicked off back in 2021 with the Lewis Hamilton Verstappen title fight. All of Verstappen's rivalries since then have just played out nowhere near on the level that the one with Hamilton did. You know, the Charles Leclerc one in 22 was quite short-lived. That was very fierce on track, but ultimately short-lived. Lando Norris has given it a go this year. He plays a bit too nicely, I think, with Max on track and off it. This is much more of a declaration of intent from Russell. It's very much I'm going to stand up to you, let's have at it. The only thing he's missing at the moment is he doesn't have the car to back that up week in, week out.
Let's have a listen to, first of all, what Max Verstappen says, and then we'll listen to George.
I still can't believe that someone can be like that in the stewards room. For me, that was so unacceptable because, I mean, we're all racing drivers. We all have a lot of respect for each other. We even, play sports together. You travel together. And of course you have moments where you get together, you crash or whatever. You're not happy. in my whole career, I've never experienced what I have experienced in the stewards' room in Qatar, and for me, that was really unacceptable.
We all have the rules to follow, and he doesn't follow it. So as I said, I find his comments pretty ironic when he comes out and says, I'm going to purposefully crash into you, I'm going to put you on your head in the wall. For me, that is unacceptable, and he's gone beyond the line here, and I'm not going to accept it. So somebody's got to stand up to a guy like this before it gets out of control. And he cannot deal with adversity. Whenever anything is not going his way, he lashes out with unnecessary anger and borderline violence. You know, we've seen it in Brazil in the past with Ocon. You saw it in 21 with Lewis, and then Mexico with Lando. First race of the year in Budapest, when he didn't have the most dominant car, crashes into Lewis, slamming his whole team. That is not a guy who I respect, and I wish he would be a better role model.
So as I said, George, I've never seen him that animated. He's normally very cool, very calm, like a gentleman. He chairs the GPDA, which is kind of the drivers' union, and to see him that angry, animated, was a surprise to me, and to call him a bully. And to use swear words, it's very un-George-like.
Well, as he put it, he feels that Verstappen's crossed the line. He's made it personal when he didn't need to. Russell says, this is what we do in Formula One. We race hard on the track and we compete hard off the track. If there's a dispute in the stewards' room, you stand up for your own corner. He doesn't understand why Verstappen has got so angry. And his accusation is that Verstappen came out of that stewards meeting with Russell and said, I'm not going to use the exact words because there's some swear words involved, basically said he would crash into him and put him upside down in the wall. Now, Verstappen says that's not actually what he said, so one of them isn't telling the truth, and of course we're never going to know because it's a personal conversation between the two of them. Some of the other drivers kind of know because Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez were also involved in the conversation on Sunday morning in Qatar. I think it'll die down in the end, but initially this weekend, unless they have some kind of contretemps again. But it's the sort of thing that they'll keep in their minds. They'll store it up, and the next incident that they have together, which there will be one, then it could all blow up again.
What will be very interesting will be if either of them decides to try and confront this and resolve it. I don't see any sign of either driver doing that at the moment. In fact, both drivers have said that they don't need to speak to the other. Russell has said that this is his way of effectively responding to Max, and he doesn't need to. And Verstappen has said that he's not going to speak to George about this. He stands by everything that he said last week. He disputes Russell's version of events that have come out now in Abu Dhabi, and he's also made it very clear that he doesn't care if that relationship's done for now, because Max doesn't. That's just not, he's not, as he pointed out, he's not here to make friends. And I think that's true to a greater or lesser extent for most of the drivers on the grid, but I think for Max it's very binary. He feels like he was properly wronged by what Russell did in the stewards' room in Qatar, and I think for Max it's kind of very simple in his head there. If he feels that he has been behaved to one way in private and then they've gone out and been two-faced in public, that for Max crosses a line. Russell feels that it's crossed the line personally because he's been brought into it. Private conversations have now been aired and all of that. I think it's going to take one of them to be the bigger person and try to resolve this, but when they're going to be at each other's throats on track and off track, I don't see where that resolution actually comes from.
Scott's made a good point there about Verstappen being very binary, and it's a point that Toto Wolff made in the press conference. Very unusually, Toto Wolff stood with George Russell in front of the media today when he was having his news conference. Normally it's just drivers on a Thursday. The team bosses don't get involved, but Wolff was at the front, and he actually was indicating that he wanted people to ask him questions. The point he was making is that everything is not right or absolutely wrong. There's nuances in life, and he feels that he didn't use these words, but I know that he would feel that Verstappen is almost like indulged by Red Bull, and this is why he brought Horner into the conversation, describing him as a yapping little terrier, and psychoanalysis is not his strong point. But he's basically saying that Red Bull do not say to Verstappen, when you go all in on something like this, it's not right. And Russell brought up some comments that Verstappen made over the radio in Hungary earlier this year. Also in that race, he crashed with Lewis Hamilton. They're basically saying Verstappen can't see shades of grey. It's all black and white. And I think people up and down the paddock will feel that there is some resonance to that, because we've all heard the radio rants when things aren't going Verstappen's way. On the other hand, Max is someone who feels very strongly about his own set of moral standards. And if he feels that someone has not been straight or fair with him, then he's not shy about saying it. So we don't know who's in the right or wrong. Wolf's probably right. There's probably shades of grey. There's shades of grey in most things in life, Jenny, aren't there? But
Yes.
when you've got someone who deals in shades of grey and someone else who only deals in black and white, it's not always necessarily easy to get those two people to see eye to eye.
Well, to be continued, I suppose. We'll have to come back and see what happens in the next episode. Let's talk about title contenders, because we're here, sat in the Ferrari hospitality, just outside it, in the as the evening descends upon us, and the lights from the hospitality and the backs of the garages shine out brightly. It is Ferrari versus McLaren. It feels like a throwback to days of yore, but McLaren lead 21 points. Surely, Scott, this is an almost unassailable lead when it comes to the fact that there are 26 points on offer this weekend.
Yeah, it's a very strong position for McLaren to be in, but there was a point during the Qatar Grand Prix where it looked like McLaren were going to wrap it up there because things were playing out quite nicely. I forget which one off the top of my head. One of the Ferraris, obviously, when Carlos Sainz got the puncture, that was a car falling out of the picture there, and suddenly it looked like that was it. The title was over. Then big swing in the other direction, and suddenly Ferrari are actually taking points out of McLaren in that race. Abu Dhabi, I think, is despite being the scene for some title deciders in the past, it's not particularly famed for throwing up sudden twists. Obviously 2021 was a very big exception, but it just shows that Ferrari have to go into this thinking it's wide open and there is something on the line.
Well, there's history for Ferrari here, isn't there? Because in 2010, Fernando Alonso arrived here as a Ferrari driver leading the championship, and it looked like he should basically be able to cruise to the championship. He only needed to finish fourth, no matter what happened.
It sounds so easy when you say it now. Even now, I know what happened.
Yeah, and somehow Ferrari managed to completely mess it up. They got their strategy wrong. They got him stuck behind a slower car. He couldn't pass. There was no DRS then. In fact, that was partly why DRS was brought in. And it all fell apart for Ferrari and Alonso. So 21 points sounds like a big lead, but I'm sure there's nervousness at McLaren. And in fact, Lando Norris was talking about the pressure that the team are feeling on themselves today. And that's understandable because they've got themselves into an incredible position. In fact, this is a great story for both teams. You know, normally the Constructors' Championship is kind of a bit of a second-class fiddle compared to the Drivers' Championship. No one really cares about it apart from the teams themselves because it's what pays the money, the prize money. But this time, 2008 was the last time Ferrari won the championship for Constructors. 1998 was the last time McLaren won it, even though they did score more points than anyone else in 2007, but they got disqualified that year because of the Spygate scandal. So it's a big story, a big step for either of them. They've both been through the mill, particularly McLaren. And so for either of them, it will be a huge achievement.
Well, let's hear from Lando Norris.
Whether it's Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, none of them have been through the pain that we have in the last 6 years. So I think it will mean more to us than anyone else. It always means something. It always means a lot to everyone, you know, that's obvious. But we've had to come from a lot lower down than where they have, which is our own fault. It's our own doing of not being good enough back then. But makes the story cooler than being the whole time at the front and then eventually winning again.
So Scott Lando there talking about what it would mean to the team, how much they've come back. They're a resurgent McLaren. Almost impossible to believe. If you go back 2 years ago, where they started that season, it was terrible. And somehow, suddenly, they've found this new lease of life.
Well, it's over the last decade and a half, really. The McLaren story is fascinating. It's almost like the sort of stumble, then the fall, then the start of the rise, then a stumble again, and then this rapid ascent over the last sort of 20 months or so since the start of 2023 when they were last in the championship after the first few races. So bad was was that start. And it's really interesting because I was thinking about this the other day, and it brought to mind a comment that Eric Boulier made at the 2018 French Grand Prix when he was McLaren, what was he?
Racing director.
Yes. Not team principal. And there was a question posed to the team principals in the press conference about do you need to be a works team to win the championship? And Boulier said yes. And at the time, obviously, McLaren had extracted themselves at great cost from the Honda engine deal, were a Renault customer. And I think it speaks to the overhaul that has happened at that team on an organisational level, a technical level, a cultural level, just the way that they've gone about everything. That was 6 years ago. McLaren were openly saying they could not win a championship in that form, and here they are on the brink, potentially, of winning a championship as an engine customer.
Yeah, there's two men primarily responsible for that. Zach Brown, the McLaren Racing Chief Executive Officer, and Andrea Stella, the man he made team principal in December 2022. So Brown enabled the change by putting Stella in charge, and Stella has restructured the team. And the difference that has made has been absolutely remarkable. As Scott said, starting 2023 with the slowest car pretty much, bad reliability. By the middle of that year, with one big upgrade, they'd moved to the front pack, and they were in the group challenging Red Bull, or the closest challengers to Red Bull with Ferrari and Mercedes. And then for much of this year, from Miami onwards, about the sixth race, they've had on balance the fastest car, not always the fastest car, but on balance. And they deserve, and on that basis, they deserve the Constructors' Championship. But also Ferrari. If you think back to it, 2022 ended. Mattia Binotto was effectively sacked as team principal because they'd started that year with the fastest car, and they'd basically thrown the championship away through a series of strategic errors, operational errors, reliability failings, and a couple of driving mistakes, but which probably came from the pressure that all those other team problems were putting on Charles Leclerc. Binotto was sacked, effectively. Fred Vasseur came in, and 2023 was a very difficult year with the car that had been designed under Binotto. It was a very nervous car. The drivers were really struggling with it. Vasseur, like Stella, has done a really great job in turning Ferrari around and really making them look like a much more stable, consistently competent team. So for both of those teams, it is a remarkable story. McLaren's more so than Ferrari's, I think, because of the distance they've had to come back from. But both of them remarkable nonetheless.
Well, let's hear from Charles Leclerc talking about that pressure and what it feels like to be fighting for Ferrari.
It means so much to me. It's the one and only team that always made me dream when I was a kid, and obviously driving for it was a dream. Now fighting for a constructor is another dream. It's going to be a tough task, but I'll give it all. So of course it means so much to me. However, when it comes to put the helmet and go, my emotions remains outside the helmet. So it's not like going into this weekend I'll have particularly high emotions when I put the helmet and go for it. Once it's time to focus on the job, I just focus on the job and try to not think about everything else around it. The best thing we can do at the moment is not putting extra pressure on ourselves, but just to perform like we've done in the last few weekends, because I really believe that we've done a really, really strong job in the last few races. Qatar, the actual performance of the car was limiting a little bit, but I believe that this weekend we should be in a better place, and if that's the case, we need to take that opportunity, finish 1 and 2, and hopefully McLaren won't finish in third, which will mean that we win the Constructors' Championship. So that's our only goal, to finish 1 and 2, and for that we've got to focus in all the small steps to achieve that.
As you say, it's such a romantic story either way, but would Ferrari fans, would the Tifosi be wrong in thinking that it's still a possibility? Because the chances, Scott, seem so slim.
I think I have to believe it's the closest that they've come in a very long time. And it's probably come earlier than both teams have expected, really. I half wonder with Ferrari whether they've kind of almost accidentally found themselves in a title
Feels
fight.
like they both have.
Well, with McLaren, the trajectory was quite clear from Miami onwards, especially Imola onwards. Ferrari had started the season sort of by default in the second best place, but had that then just never really kicked on from there, and had the wobble with the upgrade that they brought in Spain, which triggered various problems, and they had to go away and correct it. And it kind of felt like half the season had passed by the time Ferrari really got a handle on things and became more than just an outlier circuit specialist, effectively. McLaren's trajectory was generally much more concrete and clear early on, but nobody could have predicted the Red Bull fall-off that has happened over the course of the year, and obviously the complete omission of one of their cars from any kind of serious point scoring from about a third of the season onwards. And that's where you end up in this slightly unusual situation with two teams that would not have had title ambitions realistically a few races into the season, both of them having a realistic claim for that. Ferrari's focus here needs to be do the best job they can in qualifying. The ideal scenario for them is a 1-2, maximises their potential, obviously, to overhaul that gap. All they can do is put as much pressure on McLaren as they can. They need to focus on doing the best job possible. That in itself will cause a little bit of nervousness and tension at McLaren, and see where it goes from there.
We have to talk about Sir Lewis Hamilton, his last race for Mercedes. It's been a long union, 12 years together, and if you go back for the engine supplier, even longer than that. But to move to Ferrari, it's a big thing.
Well, it's been a difficult year for Hamilton, and it's coming to a difficult end, it would appear. We don't know how he's going to get on this weekend, but the last few races have not been great for him. He drove a great race in Las Vegas, but he had terrible qualifying, and qualifying has been his sort of Achilles heel, really.
Which is so weird, because he's so good.
He's the all-time world record pole sitter. I think he was saying today it's been much more difficult this year than he expected it to be. And I don't know this is just speculation, but I suspect that the fact that he's leaving has played into the difficulties he's had this year. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear down the line about how much more difficult it was than we already know. But you can imagine it's a bit like sort of deciding you're going to divorce your wife and then living with her for a year, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah.
In February he told Toto Wolff that he was not going to be sticking around,
which he wasn't expecting.
Which Wolff wasn't expecting, and they've had to do 24 races together in a car that has been up and down in competitiveness. And in Formula One, it's so intense, the level of competition, and you've got to be at your best every single day to get the best results. And it's really hard to imagine how two people, knowing that they're parting at the end of the year, can have been in the right mindset to do that.
Well, let's hear from team boss Toto Wolff.
In a way, it isn't so present yet, because I guess it's going to kick in after the race, that this was the last time that we have raced together. But until then, everything is built up, everything is still concentrating on the sessions, trying to have a quick car, and then let's see what happens afterwards.
Is that really true? You've been able to compartmentalise it like that? You haven't found yourself thinking, this is all a bit unusual,
No, that was at the beginning of the season when Lewis told me that he wanted to do this. It seemed unusual, him in a red Ferrari overall. It's like, how is that? I can't make that picture for myself somehow. But obviously that is not the case anymore.
Were you actually surprised by that decision? Because obviously it was your decision. You initially wanted to give him just a 1-year contract, I understand. It ended up being what they call a 1+1. He exercised that option. You made that decision. Quite a ruthless decision, really. People could see it as. Were you not expecting that this sort of thing might happen at that point?
I think I've been long enough around doing contracts. So it's pretty clear when you do a 1+1 that there is the option that this is just a year. So in a way, that's always has been in the back of my mind, that it was an option because there was the contractual right to do so. So maybe that's why it didn't come as a total surprise.
So how did you react in those initial moments?
I don't know, if something like this happens, I go in this mode of, okay, what are we going to do now? What's the opportunity here? And that has been the case before in my life. Obviously, this is in terms of a decision of bigger magnitude, because it's Lewis, and Lewis equals Mercedes, Mercedes equals Lewis. We have this great success together over those years. But still, that instinctive reaction kicked in of what is the opportunity here.
Looking at the big picture of what you've achieved together, what has he meant for the team?
Well, when Lewis joined, everything changed for the team. It's when we started to win races regularly. We finished second in the championship in 2013 because we had two great drivers on the peak of their doing.
And of course, you started the journey together as well.
Yeah, we started it together, but I wouldn't put it down to, maybe only him or me. It was a group that came together on that journey. But he, the superstar driver came. We knew that, whatever he was able to extract from the car was what the car was capable of doing, and that's always good for a team. You cannot compromise on the driver quality, and this is something that I learned very early on. What's in Williams already. So we've grown into this formidable partnership, winning 115 or 120 races in the Mercedes years since 2013. We won 8 constructor championship and seven drivers, and in that respect, you need to celebrate every moment that this has given to us.
He's also, or at least you together, have also made quite a big impact off the track. Together with Mercedes, he's established diversity and racial identity as a topic that should be discussed in Formula One and taken seriously, which I think it probably wasn't before he joined Mercedes. How has that changed both Mercedes as a team and Formula One as a sport, do you think?
He was definitely someone that gave impulses to change things and do things. Now, I would say that Mercedes knows its responsibility on the topics as diversity and fighting racism or anti-Semitism. That has been always something that we were absolutely targeting. This is the responsibility of the group also. And when he came, obviously, there was new angles that we were looking at things, different perspectives that he provided to us. We are the team with the greatest diversity today, and we've set ourselves challenging KPIs in order to, create opportunity for underrepresented groups and underprivileged groups. And we wouldn't have done it at that magnitude without him.
Now, the story of Mercedes and Lewis together has generally been one of success. Ironically, that stopped with one of the most controversial moments in Formula One history, which I know we've discussed before. You and the team wanted very much to right what you perceived as a wrong in Abu Dhabi in 2021. You haven't been able to do that. How does it feel ending the journey, having not found that redemption, if you like?
I guess we always give it our best shot, and we've been the absolute benchmark for 8 years, and then we dropped the ball a bit, but still finished third and second. And in the years before, and then this year, although we are just fourth on the road, we won a few races. So having said that, sport is in its nature that the same team doesn't win every single race or doesn't win every single championship, as it is in all the other sports. How does it feel to not achieve the 8s for him? I think he deserved it, and we would have loved it to be with us, with Mercedes, but at heart we know that we've had the best racing driver in the world in our car for so many years.
In a way, I guess you've finished on a high, in the sense that after a couple of barren years in terms of victories, he's won 2 races this year for Mercedes. On another hand, he's struggled this year, particularly in qualifying, and you can see how much that's hurting him as a competitive animal. What do you think has gone wrong for him on that front this year? Do you think the fact that he's leaving has anything to do with it?
I think there will be many factors at play, but sometimes qualifying results are also very tight, and the statistics don't always represent that in the right way. We have seen on a day where he's won with the car that he's as fast as he has been. His race performances have been very good when the car did what he wanted, and I think it would be too easy to blame him for not driving on the level he did before, anything like that. I think it is our obligation to provide the drivers with a car that they drive fast, and we have not been able to give him that car.
What about personal tensions? There's been a bit of a story in the last few days that came out of some remarks that you made in the Mercedes book, about shelf life, which obviously you made a long time ago and have just come out now, but they came out at quite a bad time because it was straight after what was probably his worst race, maybe in his entire career in Brazil. Has that created, what kind of tension has that created behind the scenes between you, and how have you resolved it?
Yeah, what we have decided in 2016 when we had the controversial end, we said we talk to each other. And even if sometimes it feels difficult to talk because you're upset on the other person because you've read stuff in the news or it has been, brought to your attention. The truth is, like you said, that book was written a long time ago. What I reference to is the shelf life of every person in our team and in Formula One. I'm asking myself the questions very regularly, and I said also that the drivers are not excluded of that, and obviously that came at the wrong time, like you said.
When you get to Abu Dhabi, and I understand that it's going to be quite a celebratory weekend in many ways, or at least that's the way you're going to try and present it, how do you must know yourself well enough now, how do you think you're going to feel?
I think we're going to feel emotional at the end of that weekend. Sunday night, I can already visualize how that's gonna feel. But it's not like he's going and is out of our world. He's not, because the person, Lewis Hamilton, will be very much here as a competitor, not anymore as on the same team, but still the one that I'm gonna meet at home. Who's going to come for dinner and we'll have a chat and play around with my son. That's not going to change. And it is just a journey with Mercedes that's ending.
And what do you think you'll see when you see him in a Ferrari for the first time? Driving through one of your best friends in Fred Vasseur as well?
Yeah. No, I'm joking here, obviously. Fred is still great. Yeah, it's going to feel unusual, I guess. In a red Ferrari, in a red suit. How does that fit to Lewis? But that's only because we've always seen him in a Mercedes race suit, be that McLaren or here. So it's going to create a huge wave of attention in the media and from the fans. That's good for the sport, and as a stakeholder and co-owner of the team, it's great.
Scott, that's Toto Wolff speaking. Do you think we'll see a resurgent Hamilton next year when he does join Ferrari? Or do you think, like he was suggesting in the past couple of races, he's lost it?
I think it would be bold to say with any kind of definitive statement that Hamilton has lost it as a 7-time world champion who drove as well as he did just a couple of races ago in Vegas and has won twice this season. Where I think there is a big question mark is over the qualifying speed and performance. Is this a Mercedes problem? Is this a current era car problem? The ground effect cars behave inherently differently. They don't naturally mesh with Hamilton's driving style, one that he perfected so well across the previous generation of car as well. Is the Ferrari going to be more amenable to the way he wants to drive these cars naturally? Is he going to be able to attack in these cars comfortably and confidently in qualifying? That's what he doesn't know, and I don't know how much. I'd love to know how much, but there will be a percentage of Lewis's head of hope and expectation about whether or not the move to Ferrari will just fix things and make things a little bit easier. But I completely agree with what Andrew was saying before we heard from Toto about that kind of the exit has to have played a part. It's almost like it's the loneliness of the exiting driver. We see it loads of times. We've seen other examples of it this year. I actually think, given where Lewis is at in his career, where he's been the last couple of seasons, the fact that he's obviously much closer to the end than the start, I think he needed this move to have the motivation and focus to do what Andrew was saying, where you have to give it absolutely everything, day in, day out. It's amazing he's done it for as long as he has, but I think he needed a change of scenery to do that for that little bit longer, for as long as he wants to do it for.
Okay, talking about drivers leaving, well, just quickly wrap things up. Esteban Ocon, he's gone. He's out of here. Haas have decided that Alpine have decided that actually they're going to bring in Jack Doohan, who has the seat for next year, but I feel like he has a lot to prove this weekend and keeping that seat. Am I right?
I think it's the start of the assessment process. We know that in Flavio Briatore, as the executive advisor, there is someone very ruthless at the head of this organisation now, and will make the changes that he thinks benefits the team, the organisation, whatever. And if Doohan isn't good enough, then they will make a change at some point. I would be surprised if it was one and done. If he was done a particular problem or something this weekend. I don't imagine that's on the cards. But he has to treat this like he will, because one of the reasons he has this drive at all for next year is he's often looked at it as, I need to do absolutely everything I can with every single opportunity. I need to not be a burden, not be an inconvenience. I need to be the lowest friction option possible and an option they have confidence in. And he's ticked every box so far, and that's why he's quite calm and confident about this weekend. But it is the start. His race, it's more than just race 0 of 2025. It's the first audition.
The Alpine are 5 points ahead of Haas. And that's kind of Haas, obviously, is where Ocon is going next year. So it's quite key in what happens this year and next year. And just on a final note, obviously, it could be the last race for 3 drivers, maybe even 4. We don't know what Perez is going to do, but we've certainly got Bottas exiting, Zhou and Magnussen. Magnussen secured a drive in sports car racing, and he's been announced today as a BMW driver next year. But yeah, it's sad at the end of each season, and we didn't lose anyone last year. It was the same drivers lining up this year, but it's a lot of change this year.
The big question after this weekend, Jenny, is going to be what's going to happen to that second Red Bull seat. Sergio Perez has been pretty poor this year, and Red Bull have been really bad at disguising the fact that they're thinking of dropping him.
Have they even really disguised it? I don't really know what's going on.
So the expectation is that he may well lose that seat, that Liam Lawson will be promoted from RB after just a few races alongside Max Verstappen. That's a big ask for him. And then they'll bring someone up from Formula 2 from the Red Bull driver programme into the second RBC, but we don't know that yet for sure. But that's what it's heading in that direction, it would seem, at the moment after Perez's difficult season.
And Zandvoort is also going. 2026 will be the last race there. Do we care that the Dutch Grand Prix is disappearing?
I think it's a shame to lose a classic venue. It was obviously a track and a race that had disappeared off the calendar for a long time, but it is one of those old school places. It was one that Lewis Hamilton waxed lyrical about when we went back there for the first time in 2021, and he was lamenting its loss today, as a few drivers have. It's a shame because you have a lot of what I would call slightly identikit races added to the calendar in recent years, lots of street tracks that are similar. There's an appetite for new events, showy events, flashy entertainment spectacles alongside Grand Prix. I thought actually Zandvoort and the Dutch Grand Prix have done quite a good job of combining both elements, but I'm just going to miss it as a circuit because it's not an absolute classic in terms of what it offers as a racing spectacle, but it's something unique, and I'll miss it from the calendar because it offers something different.
Final thoughts, who's going to win the championship?
McLaren,
yeah.
Okay, I have to go with McLaren as well. Thank you so much to Andrew. Thank you to Scott Mitchell-Marm as well. You can hear coverage across the weekend. We will be on 5 Sports Extra on Sunday for coverage of the race beginning at 12:45. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.